Welcome back to this series on rooms and all the things you need to consider when you're either starting out and deciding where to locate, or at any time through your practice where you might be relocating. So this video is about how to avoid costly building items and so forth, hopefully before you buy. So at least, they're not necessarily deal breakers, but at least before you go into something, you can find out whether or not you have the budget to accommodate these kind of hidden costs, if you like. We've seen these items again and again over many years, so here's some valuable tips for you. So firstly, sinks. Don't presume that where you want to put a sink in your room, you're going to be able to. So if you're on a concrete floor, for example, these days they're often made with a thick mesh through the floor, and it's not so easy to drill, and there's only certain places that you will be able to drill. So get an engineering drawing, which the building probably will have if it's fairly new, and you can have a look and you can see whereabouts you would be able to drill and so forth. You can get an engineer, or you can engage someone like us to have a look at that for you before you spend a lot of money on that. Another costly item can often be air conditioning. So you might go into a space and think, yeah, I can really imagine us here, this would be a wonderful place to practice. It might have air conditioning and you think, great, it's working well. But then you close it down and you partition off rooms, then suddenly you're going to need to have a split system in each room to keep the place cool. Will you be allowed to do this with the planning permit? Will you be able to run extra heads off the existing units? Maybe, maybe not. So check that out, because if you've got to put in a whole lot more air conditioning, that's not, again, a deal breaker, but it could be a very expensive item for you. Another item is sprinklers. So this applies to commercial buildings where you see little sprinklers in the ceiling. At all costs, try not to move them, because if you have to move them, and you might need to, but if you do have to, that'll involve the FES, the Fire Essential Safety Services, coming, shutting down the building or isolating for a period of time so that sprinklers and so forth can be adjusted. Now again, it's not a deal breaker, but it is a very expensive item, so if you can avoid it, it would be a good thing to be able to avoid, or go into it with eyes wide open, as I said. Considering telephones is another thing. Telstra is a law unto its own, so checking that the telephone lines are already there and not presuming. So making sure that we had a practice, for example, where they were all crushed under the street. Who knows? It hadn't been a practice for a long time, but the doctor thought, yeah, it'll be fine. And not only did we have to get the lines hooked up, but before that we had to get the lines actually replaced. That slowed down the opening of his practice an awfully long time. We've even found places before that haven't had gas connected and so forth. So finding out this, or making sure you're saying to your builder to check these things out early, so that you're making sure that it's done and it's connected and everything's right and ready to go for the day you sort of open up and whatever. Checking your internet connection is obviously vital too, making sure that the speed and so forth of the internet is going to suit the practice that you are operating from there and the use that you will have. And the last one is the biggest one of all for doctors, thinking about sound. So often, particularly in a commercial building, sound will travel really fast. So make sure that you go there when it's quiet and you're able to talk through, be in a room, have somebody else in the other room and see if you can hear people. Again, it's not a deal breaker, but it could be a very expensive item to try and, put in sound insulation, sound resistant plasterboard and so forth. These are not cheap things to do. So find out what the sound situation is before you go in and purchase. So they're the main things that I have found over the years can be very expensive for doctors when they're going into buildings. So check those items out. How do you check them out? Well, if you're engaging someone like us, we'll get our builder to go along with you and they'll have a look at it, and they'll at least tell you, the likelihood is this is going to happen and so forth. It could also be that these items give you some play with the landlord if you're renting, that you can say, look, I can't do X, Y, and Z. Can you help me with a rent-free period or something along that line, because the fit-out's going to be more expensive than I had anticipated. So I hope that that's helpful for you, and I hope most of all it will save you some costly expense that you didn't need to spend, or you're at least more aware of and you're budgeted for. So thank you for watching the video today.